At the will reading, Grandpa's lawyer gave me $20 million. My parents demanded it, but I refused. Then, please stay with me as I tell my story. And please, do not forget to support our channel by subscribing to our channel, liking our videos, and sharing your loved ones. Your support means the world to us. Now to our story. When Grandpa's lawyer opened the envelope, I froze. Hearing my name alongside $20 million was more shocking than I could ever imagine. I looked at my parents, Mark and Linda Carter, and saw their eyes widen, a flicker of greed burning behind their shocked expressions. I had always known my parents loved money, but seeing it displayed so plainly like this made my stomach twist. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. Grandpa had always been special to me. He believed in independence and hard work, even when others doubted me. He left me $20 million, a fortune I had never expected, and I could feel his trust in me in that moment. My parents, however, immediately changed. The warmth of family vanished from the room, replaced by tension and sharp whispers. Their voices were polite but calculated, each word carrying a hint of expectation. "Olivia, think about the family," my mother said softly, but I could hear the edge beneath her tone. "We've always shared everything. Maybe it's only fair you consider sharing a portion with us." My father leaned forward, his smile forced. "You know how much we've supported you, sweetie. Grandpa would have wanted us to stick together as a family." I looked down at my hands, feeling a mix of disbelief and determination. Grandpa's wishes were clear. He had always admired my independence and honesty, and I could not betray that. I had worked hard for my life, and suddenly having this inheritance meant I had a chance to build something meaningful on my own, without anyone trying to control me. Even though my heart ached at seeing my parents' disappointment, I knew I had to stay strong. Their attempts at persuasion were subtle but unmistakable, the first seeds of betrayal planted in the name of family unity. I realized in that moment that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally were letting greed guide them. As the lawyer continued to read the will, I listened carefully, absorbing every detail. I felt a strange mixture of gratitude, grief, and resolve. Grandpa had entrusted me with more than just money. He had given me the freedom to make my own choices and the responsibility to protect my own path. I swallowed hard, meeting my parents' expectant gazes, and quietly decided that I would honor Grandpa's wishes, no matter what they said or did. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of the decision settling over everyone. I could feel my heart racing, but beneath it all was a calm certainty. This inheritance was mine to guide, and nothing, not even my parents' greed, would change that. Later that evening, after the will reading, my parents asked me to come into the study. The room felt smaller than usual, and their expressions were careful, almost rehearsed. I could sense immediately that this conversation wasn't about celebrating Grandpa's wishes. It was about them. "Olivia," my mother began, her voice soft but insistent, "you know how much we've done for you. All these years supporting you, making sure you had everything. Don't you think it's only fair to share some of this inheritance?" Her words hit me in a strange way. There was an attempt to make me feel guilty, a tug on old memories of favors, sacrifices, and times I had leaned on them. My father added, "We're not asking for everything, just a portion. You'd be doing the right thing, keeping the family together." I felt a knot in my stomach. They were twisting my sense of duty, painting me as selfish if I refused. They were trying to make me doubt myself, using the same tactics they had for years: guilt, reminders of childhood dependence, and promises of love tied to obedience. I realized then how familiar this felt, how predictable. This wasn't just about money. This was about control. I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. Part of me wanted to say yes, to avoid conflict and the sadness in their eyes, but another part of me was alert, noticing the patterns I had ignored for too long. Every manipulation, every subtle hint of obligation, every veiled threat, it all added up. I wasn't going to fall for it this time. While they continued speaking, I quietly decided I needed a record of these moments. I started taking mental notes, remembering phrases, gestures, and the tone of their voices. I even planned to write everything down later. It wasn't about mistrust for the sake of mistrust. It was about protecting myself from the consequences of their greed, in case things escalate. As the conversation went on, I noticed their frustration growing. Their polite words started to strain, and their patience began to thin. I could see them calculating, wondering how far I would bend, how much I would yield. I realized that they had always seen me as someone who could be persuaded, someone whose sense of family and loyalty could be exploited. When I finally left the study, my heart was heavy but my mind was clear. I wouldn't give in to their pressure. I understood the game now, and I was determined to navigate it carefully. They could push, plead, or manipulate all they wanted, but I had already decided that my grandfather's trust and my own independence were more important than any temporary comfort their approval might. That night, as I documented the conversation, I felt a strange sense of control. For the first time, I wasn't just a daughter in their world. I was someone who could protect herself, someone who could see their intentions and respond thoughtfully, without being caught up in old patterns. It was a small victory, but an important one. A few days after the initial pressure, my parents' tactics grew sharper. They cornered me in the living room, their voices low but firm, trying to make every word feel like a warning. "Olivia," my father said, "you need to think carefully. If you don't share that money, don't expect us to consider you part of this family anymore. We could even look into legal ways to challenge the will." My mother added, "We've given you everything, and now you're turning away from us. Are you really going to risk losing your family over money?" Their words hit like a punch. I felt a surge of anger, but beneath it, a cold clarity. They weren't asking, they were threatening. I realized they believed they could scare me into submission. Their threats of disownment and legal action were meant to make me doubt myself, to shake the resolve Grandpa had trusted me. That evening, I decided I needed guidance. I reached out to Grandpa's lawyer, Mr. Franklin, and explained the situation. He listened carefully, nodding as I described every interaction. Then he gave me reassurance I hadn't expected. "Olivia, your grandfather's will is clear. You are fully protected legally. Any attempt by your parents to interfere will backfire. They won't succeed if you follow the instructions exactly." Hearing those words lifted some of the weight from my shoulders, but I still felt anger simmering. I hated the way my parents tried to manipulate me, the way they used family ties as weapons. I wanted to lash out, to shout, or even to punish them in some visible way. But a part of me knew that acting on impulse would only give them satisfaction and possibly harm my position. Revenge, if it was to be done, had to be planned carefully. I spent that night thinking, weighing every possibility, imagining how I could protect myself while ensuring they felt the consequences of their greed. I reminded myself that composure was my greatest weapon. Showing anger would only feed their belief that they still had control. I needed to remain calm, calculating, and patient. Over the next few days, I started laying out a plan. I wouldn't just defend myself. I would make sure every move I made reinforced my independence and strength. I documented everything, kept copies of the will and related documents, and mentally prepared for any attempts they might make. I realized that the best revenge would not be hasty confrontation. It would be their gradual realization that they had no power over me. By the end of the week, I felt a sense of control returning. The anger that had bubbled up was still there, but it was now disciplined. I knew exactly what I needed to do. My parents could threaten, plead, or plot, but I was no longer the same person who might have caved years ago. I was ready to navigate this with precision, patience, and quiet strength, turning their own tactics against them without ever losing my cool. One afternoon, while walking past the kitchen, I heard my parents' voices whispering. Curious, I paused just enough to catch fragments of their conversation. They were talking about ways to access my inheritance without me noticing. My heart sank. The casual way they plotted behind my back made it clear. They weren't just disappointed or upset. They were scheming. I overheard them discussing phone calls to family friends, accountants, and even distant relatives. They were planning to create situations that would pressure me, confuse me, and possibly trick me into giving them a share of the money. The realization hit me hard. The people who were supposed to love and protect me were instead trying to exploit me. Their concern for family had always been conditional, tied to what they could gain. It became clear in that moment that I had been living with illusion. I had hoped my parents truly valued me for who I was, not for what I could provide. The betrayal cut deeper than anger. It was a painful recognition that their love had always been mixed with self-interest. Everything I had trusted about their intentions now felt like a lie. Instead of confronting them immediately, I decided to act quietly. I couldn't let them see that I had caught on. Any direct reaction would alert them and potentially make them more aggressive in their plan. I needed proof, evidence that could protect me if things escalate. I started documenting everything. I wrote down every suspicious call, every unusual question, every suggestion they made that seemed aimed at manipulating. I even kept track of the times they met with other family members or outsiders. I knew I had to be careful. This wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about keeping myself safe. As I watched them interact with friends and distant relatives, I noticed patterns. Certain phrases repeated, certain promises were made quietly. They were building a network, a web of influence meant to ensnare me. The more I observed, the more determined I became to remain untangled. Their greed and deceit became obvious, and my anger grew, but I held it in check. Acting rashly would only give them an advantage. The sense of betrayal made me stronger, in a strange way. Every secret plan they made became a reminder that I couldn't rely on anyone but myself. I realized that the best way to protect myself was to stay calm, collect evidence, and wait for the right moment to respond. By the end of that week, I had a clear record of their actions and intentions. I felt a mix of sadness and resolve. Sadness for the family I had imagined, resolve for the path I now had to take. My parents' betrayal had revealed their true nature, and I was ready to face the challenge with careful planning and quiet determination, knowing that truth and patience would eventually give me the upper hand. After weeks of watching my parents' schemes, I decided it was time to act. I quietly took a portion of my inheritance and invested it in a small but promising business I had always dreamed of starting. It was something completely my own, a cafe and bookstore in a neighborhood I loved. The decision gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in years. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't confront them or announce my plans. Instead, I let them continue their attempts to manipulate me, knowing that their frustration would grow as they realized they had no influence over my choices. Each time they asked about my plans or hinted that I should reconsider, I simply smiled politely and remained vague. Their growing impatience became a silent confirmation of my independence. The small victories were subtle but powerful. My father tried to convince me to meet with an accountant he recommended, claiming it was for my benefit, but I had already made all my arrangements with trusted professionals. My mother tried to guilt me with stories of family hardship and past sacrifices, but I stayed composed, listening without yielding. Each attempt to control me failed, and with every failure, my confidence strengthened. As the days passed, the tension in the house became more noticeable. My parents grew restless, making sharp comments and glancing at me with barely concealed irritation. Their attempts to intimidate me became less calculated and more erratic. I noticed my mother sighing heavily, pacing the living room, while my father muttered under his breath about how stubborn I had become. I realized they had always underestimated me, assuming I would fall into old patterns of obedience and compromise. That misjudgment worked in my favor. I could focus on my goals while they floundered, trying to regain the control they had never truly had. Meanwhile, my business plan moved forward smoothly. I secured the lease, hired a small team, and began setting up the space exactly as I envisioned. Each step I took reinforced the independence I had fought for, and each milestone reminded me that my choices were my own. By keeping my actions quiet and letting my parents' frustration grow, I was achieving something more than financial security. I was proving to myself that I could act decisively, think ahead, and protect what was mine without confrontation or drama. Their desperation became more apparent with each passing day, and I watched without guilt. I didn't need to retaliate openly. Their lack of control and mounting anxiety were already consequences of their own actions. I felt a sense of calm triumph. For the first time, I understood the power of patience and strategy. Through this decisive move, I wasn't just building a business. I was building a life where I called the shots, free from manipulation, free from fear, and fully aware of the strength I had discovered within myself. A week later, my parents invited me to a family dinner, pretending it was just a way to reconnect. I sensed immediately that this was not a casual gathering. From the moment I arrived, their smiles seemed forced, and the questions felt pointed. They wanted to test me, to see if they could provoke doubt or guilt. During the meal, my mother brought up old memories, highlighting times she had sacrificed for me. "Remember when we helped you move into your first apartment?" she said, her tone soft but heavy with expectation. "You've always had our support, and now you act like you don't need us." My father added examples of my childhood mistakes, trying to frame me as ungrateful. "We did everything for you, Olivia. Don't you think it's time to show some appreciation?" I took a deep breath and stayed calm. I listened, nodding politely, letting them speak without interrupting. When it was my turn, I responded logically and with quiet dignity. "I am grateful for the support I received growing up," I said carefully. "But gratitude doesn't mean giving up what was entrusted to me legally. Grandpa's wishes were clear, and I intend to honor them." I noticed their expressions shift slightly, confusion and unease creeping into their faces. I chose my words deliberately, hinting subtly that I knew more than they realized. "I've learned a lot about handling responsibilities and protecting what matters," I said lightly, without accusation, but the meaning was clear. They glanced at each other, exchanging worried looks. The tension in the room changed. Their attempts at emotional manipulation were no longer effective. I remained composed, firm, and polite, refusing to react to guilt or pressure. Every time they tried to push, I responded with calm reasoning, not anger. Throughout the dinner, I could feel the dynamic shifting. My parents were losing the sense of control they had clung to for years. Their strategies, once predictable and effective, were now failing. I could see frustration building, their attempts at subtle threats and hints of coercion growing weaker under the weight of my composure. By the end of the evening, the air between us had changed. They no longer carried the confident authority they had used to manipulate me. Instead, there was hesitation, a quiet realization that I would not be swayed easily. I left the table feeling a mix of relief and satisfaction. This dinner was more than a meal. It was a test of strength and patience. I had faced emotional manipulation without reacting impulsively, and I had signaled that I was aware of their schemes without confrontation. The balance had shifted in my favor, and I could feel it. For the first time, I truly understood that control comes not from threats or guilt, but from calm confidence and clear boundaries. I walked away that night knowing the family dynamic had changed. My parents were no longer in charge of me, and I had quietly taken the first real step toward reclaiming my independence and asserting the authority that Grandpa had trusted me with. I decided it was time to take the next step. I gathered the evidence I had quietly collected over the past weeks: documents, notes, and records of my parents' attempts to manipulate me regarding the inheritance. Carefully, I shared selected pieces with Grandpa's lawyer, Mr. Franklin, making sure he had a clear picture of their schemes. After reviewing everything, Mr. Franklin assured me that the documents were strong enough to protect my rights. He also told me he would address the issue with my parents directly if needed. "Olivia," he said, "if they try to challenge the will or interfere in any way, even small missteps could backfire spectacularly. They need to know this is serious." I trusted his judgment. By taking this approach, I didn't have to confront my parents directly. I could stay calm, keep my distance, and let the law do the work. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that their own actions could be used against them if they persisted. A few days later, I noticed subtle changes in my parents' behavior. They spoke less boldly, glancing at each other nervously when they thought I wasn't watching. I could feel their frustration growing as they realized their usual tactics weren't working. They tried to maintain control, but the pressure was now on them, not me. Even without saying a word, I could see the psychological impact taking hold. They were used to being in charge, used to bending situations to their favor, and now they were facing the consequences of their own greed. I didn't need to gloat or react. Just observing their unease gave me a sense of calm victory. My parents made attempts to probe me indirectly, asking questions about meetings with lawyers or hinting at potential loopholes. I answered carefully, revealing nothing. Each time, their expressions shifted, a mix of worry and irritation, showing they understood their influence had weakened. Meanwhile, I focused on my own life and investments, moving forward quietly and deliberately. I didn't need to rush or force the situation. I had taken the steps needed to ensure my protection, and now I could watch as my parents struggled with their own failed plan. Over time, it became clear that their tactics were failing. The confidence they once displayed was gone. I noticed them second-guessing their own words, hesitating before speaking, and avoiding topics that could trigger confrontation. The psychological shift was subtle but undeniable. They no longer held the power they thought they did. I felt a growing sense of empowerment. By using careful strategy and keeping my distance, I had turned their own schemes against them. I was no longer reacting out of anger or fear. I was guiding the situation quietly, letting consequences unfold naturally. Their frustration only reinforced my resolve, reminding me that patience and careful planning were far more powerful than anger or confrontation. For the first time, I could truly feel the balance of control shifting entirely in my favor. After seeing my parents struggle with their failed schemes, I decided to take action in a way they would never expect. I quietly reached out to neighbors and family friends whom my parents had tried to manipulate or pressure. Some had been caught in their small schemes, others ignored or dismissed. I offered help, guidance, and support where I could, making sure it was sincere and practical. Slowly, people began to notice. Those who had felt used or threatened by my parents' behavior now found someone they could trust. I didn't make a show of it or announce my actions. I simply acted with kindness, honesty, and reliability. Word spread quietly, and my reputation began to grow in ways that had nothing to do with my inheritance. Meanwhile, my parents noticed the shift. They could sense that their influence was slipping, not just over me, but in the wider circle of people they thought they controlled. Their sharp comments and probing questions began to feel weaker, less certain. I could see it in their faces: frustration, confusion, and an underlying fear that their plans were unraveling. I found satisfaction not in confrontation, but in knowing that I was thriving while they were powerless. Every time someone came to me for advice, every time I offered support and saw gratitude in their eyes, I felt the quiet weight of revenge settling into place. I didn't have to argue, yell, or expose them publicly. Their failure and my success were already speaking louder than words. I focused on my own growth as well. My business was progressing steadily, my investments were secure, and I had built a small network of people who respected me for who I was. I no longer felt the need to prove myself to my parents, because their opinions no longer mattered. Their desperation became more visible each time they tried to regain some influence. and I noticed how tense they became around neighbors or family friends who had once been under their sway. The contrast between us was clear. I moved through life with calm confidence, making decisions thoughtfully and with purpose. My parents, on the other hand, seemed increasingly erratic, their control slipping further with each passing day. I realized that true power was quiet and steady, not loud and demanding. By helping others and strengthening my own life, I turned the tables. I was no longer just defending myself. I was building a life and a reputation that my parents could not touch. Every act of kindness, every smart decision, every bit of independence reinforced the reality that I was thriving on my own terms. The subtle psychological revenge was complete. They had tried to manipulate and control, and now they watched silently as I succeeded. My calm strength, my independence, and my careful actions left them frustrated and powerless. And for the first time, I felt entirely in control of my life and my future. The day finally came when I decided to confront my parents one last time. I didn't approach them with anger or shouting. Instead, I prepared carefully, gathering the documents, notes, and evidence that showed their repeated attempts to manipulate me and interfere with my inheritance. I wanted this to be clear, undeniable, and final. I invited them to the living room and spoke calmly. "Mom, Dad," I began, "I want to be very clear about something. I know exactly what you've been trying to do regarding Grandpa's inheritance. I have all the evidence, and it shows your attempts to manipulate me and control what was meant to be mine." Their faces changed instantly. Surprise, fear, and then a mix of guilt and desperation crossed their expressions. My mother tried to soften the blow with tears. "Olivia, we're your parents. We only wanted what's best for you. Please, just consider sharing some of it," she pleaded. My father added, his voice shaking, "We made mistakes. We never meant to hurt you. Think about the family. We can work this out." I listened quietly, letting their words hang in the air. I didn't respond with emotion. Instead, I calmly laid out the facts, showing them the patterns, the calls, the meetings, and the attempts to influence me. I spoke slowly, making sure every point was understood, and every effort to excuse their behavior was met with logic rather than argument. When they realized that manipulation and pleading would not sway me, their desperation became visible. My mother's tears grew more frantic, my father's voice more strained. They begged, tried to appeal to old memories, and even attempted to make me feel guilty. But I remained firm. I told them clearly, no amount of pleading or manipulation will change this. Grandpa's wishes are final, and I will never hand over a dime to either of you. I could see the shock settle in. They had underestimated me for years, assuming that love, guilt, or fear could control my actions. Now the power had shifted completely. Their greed and betrayal had left them outside the life I was building, and I made it clear that this distance would remain permanent. Finally, I stood up, my heart steady and my mind clear. "Your betrayal and greed have consequences," I said. "You can no longer influence my life. I am moving forward, and this is where we part ways." I walked out of the room feeling lighter than I had in years. The weight of fear, doubt, and pressure that my parents had placed on me for so long was gone. I felt liberated, confident, and victorious. Not because I had humiliated them, but because I had stood my ground, honored my grandfather, and claimed my independence. For the first time, I realized that true victory wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. It was about being strong, calm, and unshakable in the face of betrayal, and walking away knowing I had taken control of my own. After the confrontation, life changed completely. I poured my energy into building the life I had always dreamed of. I invested further in my business, expanding the cafe and bookstore, adding a small community space where people could gather, read, and share ideas. It became a place I was proud of, a reflection of my hard work and vision. I also purchased a home, a space that felt truly mine. Every corner, every detail reflected my choices and my independence. For the first time, I felt completely in control of my surroundings, free from anyone trying to influence or manipulate me. I decorated it with care, creating an environment that was peaceful, welcoming, and entirely my own. Beyond personal gains, I started supporting causes that mattered to me. I contributed to local schools, helped fund programs for underprivileged children, and offered guidance to people struggling with challenges similar to what I had faced. Giving back felt powerful. It wasn't about proving anything to my parents. It was about building a life full of meaning and purpose, shaped by my values and choices. Over time, my parents faded into the background. Their attempts to control or influence me had failed completely. They were still present in my life, but only as distant figures, powerless to affect my decisions or my happiness. The anger and frustration they had carried were now irrelevant to me. I was free, fully independent, and focused on what truly mattered. I often thought about Grandpa and the wisdom he had always shared. He had left me more than money, He had given me a chance to shape my own destiny, to make decisions that reflected my character and my strength. I realized that true inheritance isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in independence, self-respect, and the courage to stand firm against those who try to control you. Looking back, I understood the quiet power of my journey. I hadn't needed to fight loudly or humiliate anyone. The betrayal and manipulation my parents had shown were met with patience, strategy, and calm determination. Watching my life grow while they remained powerless was the ultimate victory, subtle but undeniable. My days became full, meaningful, and joyful. The cafe thrived, the home felt warm and secure, and the people I helped expressed gratitude that reminded me why perseverance and integrity matter. I had built a life that reflected who I truly was, without compromise or fear. In the end, the story closed not with conflict, but with peace. My parents' greed and betrayal no longer held any sway over me. I had claimed my independence, honored my grandfather's trust, and created a life that was rich in freedom, purpose, and self-respect. The revenge was quiet, strong, and complete, a testament to the strength found in patience, strategy, and unwavering belief in oneself.